The dentist's tools are still on the tray, not stored away, not packed. Arranged in the order they were last used, in a clinic that has been sealed for over 20 years, on an island where almost 8,000 people once lived. On the shelf above the chair are the molds made from those workers' teeth, plaster impressions taken over decades of mandatory checkups. Some of them show what the work did to a person over time: teeth worn flat, compressed at the roots, ground down by a life spent in conditions that dental forms do not have a category for. The files with their names are still in the cabinet next to the chair. The operating room lights are still mounted above the table. The morgue is at the end of the corridor. None of it has been cleared. Nobody collected any of this, not because they forgot. There is a specific reason, one that tells you exactly how this island ended, and what kind of ending that was. The island is called Ikeshima, off the Nagasaki coast, less than 1 square kilometer. You can walk from the ferry terminal to the far edge in the time it takes to watch a short video. At its peak in the 1970s, almost 8,000 people lived here. 135 numbered apartment blocks, a cinema, a department store, a school, a baseball league, a hospital with a full surgical ward, and a dental clinic with every tool still on the tray. Beneath the island and the seabed surrounding it, there are 90 kilometers of tunnels. That number is where the story starts. On November the 28th, 2001, it is also where the story ended. Ikeshima had people before the mine. A few hundred, a fishing settlement, a community that mattered to itself and to no one at any broader scale. The island was small, the coastline rough, and there was no particular reason for anyone outside Nagasaki Prefecture to know it existed. In 1952, geological surveys commissioned by Matsushima Coal Mining confirmed what the company had suspected. The seabed surrounding the island sat above a coal seam of unusual quality. The company acquired the extraction rights. 7 years later, in 1959, the mine opened. What followed was not a camp. Matsushima built a permanent city because they understood that operating a mine of this depth and scope required a stable resident workforce, and a stable resident workforce required conditions under which people would agree to stay. The wages were the first condition. Workers on Ikeshima were paid significantly above the mainland average, a premium that reflected what the job actually involved. You were descending into tunnels beneath the ocean floor. The mine shafts went below sea level and kept going, below the seabed itself. At depth, the rock separating the workers from the ocean above them was measured, monitored, and assessed for structural integrity on an ongoing basis. There were protocols for water ingress. There were emergency procedures for the conditions that come with working under the sea. The workers understood exactly where they were and what was above them, and they went down every morning anyway, because that was the work, and the work paid what it paid. That is not unusual for mining. What is unusual is the specific geometry of it. The ocean directly overhead, the island above the ocean, 8,000 people asleep in their apartments above the island, while a shift continued in the tunnels, 90 kilometers below. The apartment blocks rose in numbered sequence, 135 of them, each reinforced concrete. The hospital was built as a full facility: surgery, dental clinic, X-ray department, blood work laboratory, morgue. The school ran from elementary through secondary level. The cinema ran films. The department store stocked what any mainland store would carry. A baseball diamond was laid and maintained. The community that formed was the kind that develops when people cannot easily leave. Everyone knew everyone. The apartments were small and the walls were thin, and you heard your neighbors through them. The views from the upper floors were extraordinary: open sea in every direction, Nagasaki in the distance, and this was the one thing about the island that nobody argued with. By the 1990s, the tunnel network had expanded to 90 kilometers beneath the seabed. The German-built mine train, a 3-wagon vehicle capable of carrying 27 people, ran workers to the shaft entrance and back on a schedule that matched the shifts. Over 42 years of continuous operation, those tunnels produced 44.5 million tons of coal. That figure is not approximate. It is the number that was recorded when the operation closed. The island's population peaked at almost 8,000 in the 1970s. Everyone who lived here understood, without needing it stated, that the mine's closure was a question of when, not whether. The coal would eventually run out, or the economics would shift, or both. They knew this. They stayed anyway because the wages were real and the community was real, and the closure felt, from inside the island, further away than it was. It was not far away. The 1990s broke the economics. Japan's asset bubble, the Baburu Keiki, the speculative expansion that had inflated land prices and funded post-war growth, collapsed in 1991. The restructuring that followed hit domestic energy industries across the country. Coal imports from Australia and Indonesia were arriving at Japanese ports at prices the Matsushima operation could not match. Domestic coal mining contracted through the decade, mine by mine. Ikushima was not unique in this. It was one of many. The practical case for closure was accurate. Maintaining 90 kilometers of undersea tunnel is expensive, regardless of what coal sells for. When the coal those tunnels produced could not be sold at a price that covered extraction costs, the operation was indefensible by any business calculation. The numbers were clear. Matsushima made the decision. The mine closed on November 28, 2001. What the accounting did not address was what 8,000 people were supposed to do with the lives they had built on a single square kilometer of island in the East China Sea. There was no dramatic announcement. The closure proceeded through official channels in the manner of a business decision, which is what it was. Workers were given the relevant notice periods. They packed what they could carry and boarded the ferry. Some of them had lived here since the mine opened. Some had been born here. Under the terms of the island's residency arrangements, company-owned property had to remain on the island. That category extended further than workers expected. When a resident had died on the island, their belongings could not legally be removed without a family member physically coming to claim them. Some families made that journey. Others did not, for reasons that were practical or financial, or simply because the distance was long and the contents of the apartment were not worth the cost of coming back. Those apartments have not been opened since. The population went from nearly 8,000 to a few hundred within 2 years, then to 130, then to 100. The number recorded as of 2025 is 89. The 89 people who remain live mostly near the port. The rest of the island, the hospital, the mine station, most of the apartment blocks, they do not go into. The hospital opened in 1959 alongside the mine, and its abandoned portion closed in 2002, 1 year after the mine, after being kept briefly operational for the last departing residents. Part of the building is still active today. A single functioning clinic serves the island's 89 remaining people, separated from the decaying portions of the same structure by a shared wall. On the other side of that wall, nothing has been cleared. The dental clinic has every tool still on the tray: picks, mirrors, drill attachments, arranged in the order they were last used. On the shelf above the chair are the dental molds made from workers' teeth, plaster impressions of the mouths of men who spent their careers in tunnels 90 kilometers below the ocean floor. Some of the molds show what decades underground did to a person: teeth worn flat, broken at the roots, compressed by a lifetime of physical work. The files with their names are still in the cabinet next to the chair. The operating room has 2 surgical lights mounted above the table. The X-ray department has the lead suits still hanging where they were left. The autoclave for sterilizing surgical tools is still in the supply room corner. The morgue is at the end of a separate corridor. It has not been cleared either. In the apartment blocks, a 1983 concert poster is still on one of the walls, which puts whoever put it there at roughly 40 years old now, somewhere on the mainland. The kitchen cabinets in several units still hold the pots and gas canisters from the last occupants. One apartment contains a photo album, left on a kitchen surface. Inside were the school class photograph from the early 1980s. The baseball team mid-season. Children growing up on an island they would eventually leave. The album did not go with them. The police station is still staffed. 2 officers are assigned to the island, one of them a volunteer. They serve 89 people on an island where there is, functionally, nothing to police. The position exists because it was established when 8,000 people lived here, and nobody has formally reviewed whether it should continue to exist. So it continues. The German-built mine train sits on its tracks at the shaft entrance, pointed at the sealed tunnel door. 2 people still live in apartment blocks that have no other occupants on their floors. The bus driver still completes his route through the island, stopping at every stand on the schedule, waiting the required interval, moving on to the next. Outside the restaurant that closed when its owner died, a group of cats returns most days and sits at the shuttered door. The owner had fed them for years. The cats have not updated their understanding of the situation. They come back, they wait, and no one on the island is feeding them reliably enough. Gunkunjima, Battleship Island, is Ikeshima's more famous neighbor, roughly 20 kilometers to the northeast. It closed in 1974, 27 years before Akishima, and was designated a United Nations World Heritage Site in 2015. You can visit Gunkunjima on an officially licensed tour. There is a designated viewing path, permanent barriers, a strict itinerary, and a documented list of what visitors may and may not see. Ikeshima has none of this. There is no preservation order, no official management, no designated path. You take the ferry from the Nagasaki coast and walk off the boat, and the island is in front of you. The hospital's abandoned wing shares a wall with the functioning clinic. The school that ran until enrollment became unjustifiable. 6 students, then 3, then stopped being a school, now meets for those 3 students in a room of a private house. The teacher commutes from the mainland. Nobody has curated any of this. Nobody has assessed its historical significance or developed a heritage plan or decided what access is appropriate. Ikeshima is not a museum. It is not a ghost town in any formal sense. It is a place that lost its reason for existing in November 2001 and has been working through the consequences ever since, at the pace of the 89 people who have not yet left. That is the difference from its famous neighbor. Gunkunjima was declared done. An authority assessed it, designated it, fenced it, put it on a list, and gave it a kind of resolution that closed places rarely receive. Ikeshima has no resolution. The active clinic and the abandoned operating room behind it exist in the same building because nobody with authority to separate them has done so, and nobody appears to be in any hurry. The most unsettling thing about Ikeshima is not what has been abandoned. It is what has not been declared abandoned yet. The shaft is sealed. The tunnels, all 90 kilometers of them, are still under the seabed in the condition they were left in on November the 28th, 2001, when the last shift ended and the workers came up for the final time. Nothing was formally decommissioned. The infrastructure stopped being used, which is not the same thing as being removed. The island above the tunnels was built entirely to support the people who went into them. The hospital was there because miners got sick underground. The school was there because workers brought families. The numbered apartment blocks were there because 8,000 people needed somewhere to sleep between shifts. The department store was there because they needed somewhere to spend wages that made the conditions bearable. None of these things had a purpose independent of the mine. When the mine stopped on November 28, 2001, the purpose of everything above it stopped in the same moment. What remained had no reason to be removed, and so it was not removed. The pots in the kitchen cabinets, the dental molds on the tray, the photo album open to the school class from 40 years ago, the cats at the shuttered door. The mining train is still on its tracks, still pointed at the sealed entrance to 90 kilometers of tunnel network that no one will descend again. The workers who rode it every morning are in their 70s and 80s now. Most are on the mainland. A few are on the island itself, near the port, retired, in functioning apartments surrounded by empty ones. Nobody has moved the train. There is no particular reason to, and there is no one with the authority to decide otherwise. So it remains where it was left on the last working day of November 2001, aimed at a door that is no longer open, on tracks that still go somewhere, pointed at a mine that is still there.